down the road of bypasses. Move on. Henderson, question 9.
I would like to ask the Shafashok what his department's plans are to refurbish and relay disintegrating roads in and around Douglas, and if he will make a payment.
Call the Minister for Infrastructure to reply. Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Department has a short-term forward programme of covering the 0 to 2 year period for highway maintenance and a development plan covering the 2 to 10 year period. Additionally, there is a residential roads budget for improving housing estates, as well as routine maintenance programmes for patching and footpath maintenance. These programmes are reviewed and updated regularly. Roads in Douglas, as with the rest of the island, are regularly inspected and their condition assessed using a range of data sources and techniques in order to determine priorities for maintenance or refurbishment. Highway Services has also recently published a 15-year roadmap covering Douglas and Onchan. This document was developed in conjunction with the Douglas Development Partnership. It describes a vision of highway and structural works for the period 2020 to 2035, and it can be found on the government's website in the Highway Services section of the infrastructure part of the government website.
Supplementary question, Mr. Henderson.
I thank the Shafashok for his answer, and indeed I thank the Shafashok for some of the road resurfacing that's been done in and around Douglas, especially on some of the estates. But can I ask the Shafashok, though, in general terms, given that Douglas is the main populace of the Isle of Man, of the Douglas Bay area, and given that its main business sector, and given that the main arterial roads of the Isle of Man run through Douglas, would he agree with me that the likes of Woodburn Road, Bucks Road, Victoria Street, Ridgeway Street, Windsor Road and the likes are actually crumbling and disintegrating in places? And I invite him to come with me for a driving assessment of the said lunar landscape to make an assessment to reprioritise what needs to be done. And can I ask, with regards to the 15-year plan, would he revisit that, especially to the likes of the Summerhill Glen flyover that seems to be re-energised from a few years ago that was thrown out by this court, and reprioritise the spending, especially to the arterial roads and the impact they have on our businesses and residents?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Council, Mr. Henderson, for his thanks for the work that the Department has achieved. And I'd be the first to say that there is far more to be done than has been done to date. And Honourable Members with a perhaps not quite as long a memory as Mr. Speaker, but certainly with a reasonable memory, will be aware that during my predecessor's time there was an assessment done of the backlog of highway maintenance that estimated investment of around about £80 to £100 million would be required to fix the highway estate across the island as a whole. And in reality, of course, we all recognise that perfection in that way is not achievable, because even if you fixed all those roads during the time it was taken, you would have other issues arising. So we need to continue to drive forward with a strong emphasis on maintenance and making sure that our budgets are spent in the most appropriate manner. The Honourable Member for Council, Mr. Henderson, highlights some of the aspects which were in the 15-year vision document, and I would encourage Honourable Members not to mistake that as being a definitive plan as to what is going to be done. That was a document that was developed in conjunction with the Douglas Development Partnership. As I said earlier, it describes a vision of highway and structural works. And when people are doing visions, they tend to be taking a very ambitious and by definition visionary approach. Actually, a lot of the road investment that is required, I would agree with the Honourable Member, is around the day-to-day road conditions around our island, and in particular to the Douglas area, which I would agree is the heart of the island in terms of business and our largest proportion of our residential and visitors, of course, as the capital. So, you know, we do need to be investing in Douglas, and I can't let the question pass without highlighting the amount of investment that is going on at the moment, particularly around the prom. I mean, you know, that's a huge investment that's going into Douglas, and we can only spend the money once. So it could be argued that Douglas is doing very, very well at the moment through the investment that it's getting. But there is indeed a need to do more. I can't comment specifically on the list of roads that Mr Henderson mentioned, but I can assure him that Ridgeway Street, which I believe was one of the ones that he mentioned, is listed for maintenance in the next 2 years. He very kindly invited me for a drive, which I'm happy to take a drive with Mr Henderson. However, whilst many of us can pass comment on the conditions of our roads, I certainly don't profess to have any expertise in assessing the condition of roads or indeed in prioritising where the expenditure should go. And if I could just highlight some of the things that my department does do to actually assess what looks like quite a simple thing, which is the condition of the road. So we have something called a scanner, which is a surface condition assessment for the national network of roads, which measures the condition of the highway and the ride quality by measuring the rutting, the cracking and the profile. We use something called scrim to measure the skid resistance of a road surface. We have a tool called a deflector graph, which measures the deflection of the pavement surface to determine the residual life of the road surface. We also carry out visual maintenance inspections, assess accident data, receive and consider reports from the public in making the decisions, which are also influenced by the road hierarchy, how it's already constructed, the materials and thickness, when it was constructed, previous maintenance records, and problems experienced, including drainage. So it is a far more sophisticated piece of assessment than certainly I, as a layperson, would have previously assumed. So if I can close with an assurance that maintenance of our roads is a very important aspiration and a requirement, and my focus is to ensure that we get the best value for money out of the budgets that we have to spend on that. Thank you, Mr President.
Now, honourable members, you said you'll close with those comments. I rather fear we shan't be closing for a while yet on this subject. I have 7 supplementary questions. Now, we're not going to have a tour of the highways and byways. The question is specifically about disintegrating roads in and around Douglas, so we've got to stick to that. And if we could have short questions and short answers, we'll get through a few more questions. Honourable Member Mr Mercer.
Thank you, Mr President. Does the Minister agree with me that the implementation of the active travel strategy demands investment in suitable infrastructure to encourage and enable people to walk and cycle safely? Secondly, does the Minister have any plans to address the poor and unrepaired state of our nation's pavements and outside our capital?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I think we're in danger of broadening the question into a debate around active travel, which is an important part of my department's priorities, along with the conditions of the roads. And in terms of the prioritisation, I mean, clearly paths or footways, as we refer to them, are part of the investment, but it's about making sure that the expenditure is going into the areas that are of most relevance and benefit. We do not have sufficient funding to do everything that everyone would want. We have to make choices, and the commitment is to try and make those choices in the optimal way, Mr President.
Honourable Member Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister consider publishing the scanner, the scrim, the deflector graph information about Douglas and elsewhere in the island if he wants, so that the public can understand what's the priority? Secondly, could the Minister also consider publishing the residential road improvement criteria that are used to select projects, and actually to identify which projects have been financed from that £500,000 a year. And finally, to build on the question from Mr Mercer, I think I heard that footway maintenance was merely from the routine maintenance budget. Can the Minister confirm that? Just for the Hansard, I think the Douglas Development Partnership was closed in 2015, and I imagine Douglas Town Council has been involved in this vision for Douglas roads through a different forum.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Number of things in there from the Honourable Member for Douglas Central. I would need to look at the practicalities and the meaningfulness of that data that Mr Thomas has referred to, and then I will assess whether it is going to actually help the public understand the decisions that are made or not. It's very technical data. We're not engineers, and I'm not sure that would be particularly helpful, but I will certainly consider it with officers.
Mr Speaker.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a point that Mr Thomas asked about, I don't recall hearing an answer about the budget for residential roads. Could the Minister give the definition of what a residential road is? Because obviously there are, I struggle to think of examples in Douglas perhaps, but I maybe think of somewhere like Station Road in Ballaugh where he lives, or the Bradder or the Glen Chass in my patch, about just whether these would qualify as residential roads or not, because obviously they have a lot of people living on them, but might otherwise be considered rural roads. So if the Minister has a definition, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I'll certainly call on the Minister's reply, but I do warn members I'm not going to have references to other parts of the island that you may be representing. Mr Baker.
Thank you very much. Well, the definition of residential roads is very interesting, isn't it, Mr Speaker? Because we have a motion further on in our order paper, which started from a motion from the old member, Mr Shimmins, which talked about 20 miles per hour limit on residential roads. So we have to be really careful about what we're talking about and in the context in which we're talking about. So at a basic level, residential roads are roads where residents live, which is a very broad definition. I think we need to be really careful for the context that we're applying it. The particular reference in my answer was to the residential roads separate part of the budget, and that is for improving housing estates. There are many housing estates right across the island, and that was specifically brought forward a number of years ago to provide a focused pot of resources to allow some of those housing estates to be refreshed in terms of their road network. And some activity has been done over the past few years and continues to go forward. From memory, that budget is about £500,000 a year, which allows us to do normally a couple of particular projects in a year, and those are selected based on need and to ensure a reasonable coverage across different areas of the island. But that was identified, I understand it before my time as Minister, identified to reflect the fact that we had modern housing estates which looked in many places quite tired in terms of the road infrastructure, and I know a number of projects have been delivered to date, and we will continue to do that with that portion of the budget.
Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I'm very reassured to hear the Minister talk about the 15-year plans in terms of being a vision rather than a plan, especially if the Douglas document is anything like the one we have for Ramsey. But I'd like to ask a question that really building on Mr Thomas's queries. If you will publish the 0 to 2 and 2 to 10-year plans that he referenced earlier about the roadworks, and if you could advise perhaps how local authorities and members of the public could feed in to some of that prioritisation work.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I think there's a number of requests being made of me in this question and supplementary questions, and I think the best thing is I will take back the sentiment that's been asked here. I'll consider with officers about the most meaningful way that we can respond to the sentiment that's been expressed here and come out with some greater forward visibility. What I don't want to do is set expectations that then becomes something which are not delivered against, because I think that's not helpful. We need to make sure that we have funding in place to deliver what it is we say we're going to deliver, and I certainly wouldn't want to be specific about schemes without having had the necessary Treasury concurrence for those matters. And so the question would be how valuable that overall publication would be, and I'll certainly look at that and come back, and I'm quite happy to write to honourable members once I've had a chance to make a considered assessment of that.
Honourable Member for Council, Mrs Lord Brennan.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister advise where did the vision for the Summerhill Mega Bridge come from? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Certainly not from myself, Mr President.
Honourable Member for Onken, Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd just like to ask the Minister, he's just talked about the residential roads and estates which are in Douglas and other parts of the island, and he talked about a maintenance budget of 500,000. Is that the basic maintenance budget that the Minister is talking about per annum? As I'm aware, the previous Minister put aside over £1 million, which was generously, I believe, successfully brought from Treasury during one of the last budgets. Is that money still available for the residential roads in the towns and elsewhere? And also with regards to where is he up to with that plan that came forward for the residential roads and estates, and with regards to the comments that he made with regards to the 15-year road maps, they clearly don't have anything to do with maintenance in them. They talk about active travel, traffic management projects, road safety projects, parking projects. I don't see the word maintenance within that. So therefore, can the Minister please confirm what maintenance budget is available for residential roads or improving the roads? And please, people do have to travel to the capital of Douglas if that's where the focus is going to be, and they might not get there with the state of some of the roads outside of Douglas.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I would highlight to the Honourable Member for Onken that the question was about the Department's plans to refurbish and relay disintegrating roads. So I think that's quite a broad statement rather than the narrow definition around maintenance. In terms of the specific around the residential roads and estates budget, it hasn't changed in my knowledge. I did say the £500,000 was from memory. Quite happy to go back and check that and to confirm that in writing, Mr President.
Honourable Member for Council, Mrs Sharp.
Thank you, Mr President. I understand that the Minister has promised to consult with his department on the future of road repairs, but I would just like him to add on to that work. I'd like to ask him why Laxey Promenade, which is only 7 miles north of Douglas, was
I'm terribly sorry. I do congratulate you on your attempt, but I cannot allow that. It wouldn't be fair to members from the south.
Hear, hear.
Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mr Quine.
Thank you, Mr President. May I firstly congratulate the Minister and the Department for the excellent work that was recently carried out in Lennox Park in myself and Mrs Christian's constituency, which went a long way to easing the plight of a lady of reduced mobility. And I'd also like to put on record my personal thanks to Mr Harding and Mr Farrell, departmental engineers, for the high level of workmanship which they carried out. Will the Minister agree with me that a lot of the issues with which he's currently being taxed result from third-party contractors carrying out work in estates which were built by developers and who often have laid nothing more than the actual base coat of asphalt, and in times past have got away with this scot-free without any recourse to proper assessment for their work? And will he therefore confirm to me that all future works of such manner will ensure that the amount of tar macadam is laid to a specific depth and a proper undertaking and assessment is made of such work?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. I'd thank the Honourable Member for Douglas South on his question and greatly appreciate his positive comments about the work that my department has done, and I would also like to commend both him and Mrs Christian for the way they worked together to bring those issues to my attention. And I think the Honourable Member makes a number of very important points in that short supplementary. I think, firstly, we have some excellent staff who do, contrary to public opinion, do take great pride in their work, are very capable and should be more highly regarded by the public of the Isle of Man than they actually are. Secondly, he makes the point about third-party contractors and developments that in the past have perhaps been done to a less robust standard than they perhaps should have been. Those things are a legacy that we have to work with now, but certainly developments that are taking place currently should be done to a very high and appropriate standard in line with the various governance, such as the manual for Manx roads, etc., etc., etc. And I will take those specific points back and actually have a look at what we can learn and to make sure that we are enforcing those standards to the appropriate extent possible. And I would, whilst I'm on my feet, highlight just an experience that I've personally seen in my own constituency, where I think that we are letting contractors make adjustments that impact the road surface, and then they leave work and cost for the public service to them pick up, with very poor quality infill after work has been done, often to connect private developments, and that is something that needs to be addressed. I think I've answered Mr. Quine's comment. Thank you very much.
On a final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. My biggest concern is that when roads are improved, they appear to be looked at in isolation. I have raised this concern before, but would the Minister please recommend to Highways that when over 80% of the road network is improved to a Premier standard, the standard of the entire network in the area is actually increased to the same standard. This will allow the area to then retain its high-quality standard potentially for the full 15 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think that I understand the gist of the Honourable Member's comment, which is about taking a more holistic approach, I believe, to the work that we're doing. And I would agree that there is certainly merit in that. Equally, we have to make sure we don't spend the finite resources that we have on roads that don't need spending on them purely for aesthetic purposes. So there is a fine balance to be had. But I'm very happy to pick that conversation up with the Honourable Member for Arbury, Castletown and Maloo and pick up his specific concerns. Thank you.